Alright, hey guys, it's Miss Summers with your notes today on indicators of water quality. So, the purpose of these notes is to help you understand how specific human actions impact water and in which ways they impact it. So, we're going to be looking at 6 specific indicators. There's going to be some videos embedded throughout. We're going to be looking at, again, how specific actions change water. So, let's begin with our first indicator. And follow along on your note outline. Everything you need to write is in red. You can pause the video so you can write things down and then listen, or vice versa. So our first measurement of water quality is something called turbidity. Turbidity is how cloudy the water is, how not clear it is, how much stuff is in it. So here, this river, this is a branch of the Mississippi River, has a very high turbidity, especially the further downstream you go, like by Louisiana and New Orleans. There's lots of sediment in the water, lots of stuff that makes the water cloudy. Okay? So why does turbidity happen? So some causes of turbidity: sediments from erosion. So remember, erosion is a natural process, but people can make it worse by cutting down trees. Because when you get rid of trees, remember from our little geosphere unit, when you get rid of plants, soil is no longer held in place. So that sediment ends up in water. Waste discharge from like a sewage pipe, algae growth, which we're going to look at here shortly, how people increase algae growth, and urban runoff. Runoff is a common source of contaminants that decrease water quality. All right, so turbidity is how cloudy the water is. Now, why do I care about turbidity? The results. Light cannot get through the water. Light is scattered and reflected or refracted. Plants are going to die in murky water, because plants need light to survive. Without the plants, the animals that live off of them are going to die of starvation or by actually suffocating on sediments. So fishies, like this little guy here, fishies breathe through their gills. They take water over their gills and take the oxygen out, and then their carbon dioxide goes back out in the water. If there is a bunch of sediment in here, it's essentially the equivalent of like if we were somewhere where it was really smoggy or smoky and you're breathing in those particles and they get stuck in your lungs. It's the same feeling for them. All right? So that is turbidity. Our next measurement is pH. All right? So if you've taken like a physical science or chemistry, maybe you know a little bit about pH, but it's how acidic something is. How acidic or not acidic. So from 0 to 7 on this diagram, 0 to 7 is an acid, 7 to 14 is a base, right at 7 is neutral. All right, so normally fresh water is a tiny bit acidic. It might be like a 6.5, maybe a very high 5, all the way up to maybe 8, depending on where you are. So if that pH changes, that's a sign that pollution is being added, that chemical reaction is occurring and changing the pH. So how does this happen? Natural conditions, so volcanic eruptions can cause an increase in acidity. But also human activities like dumping of waste, farm runoff. And why we're concerned with it, if you've taken biology, this will come as a review. Life requires a certain pH to live in. Different animals have different ranges that they like. And if the pH gets outside of that range, even a tiny bit, it can cause the enzymes, those are little molecules inside all living things that do chemical reactions, those little enzymes don't work. And if those little enzymes don't work, the animals are not going to be able to carry out their life functions and they will die. So pH, how acidic the water is. 0 to 7 is an acid. All right, our next, before we jump there. So here's our pH tolerance of various aquatic species. I know you don't have this on your chart, but let's go ahead and take a look at it. Light blue areas indicate pH levels which cannot be tolerated. So if I look here, here's a pH of 6.5 and it's going down to 4. 4 is more acidic than a 5. The smaller the number, the more acidic it becomes. Okay, so if I think about, let's say the pH goes down to 5, okay? Well, if the pH goes down to 5, frogs, they are still okay. They could still survive and reproduce, and it's all good. So you're like, okay, what's the big deal? Well, what do frogs eat? Frogs eat things like insects. They eat dragonflies and bugs, and these guys, mayflies. Well, mayflies cannot survive at a pH of 5. So if these mayflies die, even though the frogs could handle it, they lost a food source, and now their population's going to go down. So it's like a big domino effect. All right, now we're moving on. Here we go. Dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen is just what it sounds like. It's how much oxygen is in the water. And you want enough oxygen because oxygen is how living things are able to get energy from their food. All right, that's why we breathe it in. It's because we need it to make energy. Changes, we abbreviate dissolved oxygen DO. Changes in dissolved oxygen can happen if water is moving really fast. That will increase the oxygen. So typically like near the surface where you have wind sort of stirring up the water, that helps. Increased temperature, if it gets hotter, the oxygen goes down because the oxygen wants to leave the water and go back into the air. And things like discharges from sewer pipes, that's going to decrease the oxygen because it causes an increase in bacteria. That bacteria is breaking down the stuff from the sewer and it sucks up all the oxygen. All right, now obviously you don't want too little oxygen. If the dissolved oxygen drops too low, the fish die. And then you're going to have that domino effect. If one kind of fish dies, then others die because they don't have food. We want to monitor dissolved oxygen because if it's too high, it can corrode and cause this chemical weathering of water pipes. So we want to be wary of that. We want it just right. All right. And now we're on the back of the sheet. We are on temperature. All right, y'all know what temperature is. You started measuring temperature in elementary school, I'm sure. Temperature, how hot or cold something is. All right, so if you have like a fish tank at home or something, you probably have one of these, especially if it's a tropical fish tank. The temperature has to be just right. Otherwise, the fish are not going to be happy. So, how do people change the temperature of the water? Well, the source might change. Shade from the shoreline. So imagine if you're on a lake on a sunny day, if you go under some trees that are by the water, it's going to be cooler there. But if you took those trees away, it would heat up faster. And lastly, a common human impact, thermal pollution. So therm means heat. So they're not dumping water that has like dirt or debris or like stuff like that in it, but they've made water warmer for whatever reason. Usually it's for a power plant like this. This is a nuclear power plant where they take water from a lake, they heat it up using the uranium, and then it makes steam, and that's what makes the electricity. And then they put the warm water back into the lake. All right, so the water's not dirty, it's just hotter. But that can be devastating for these ecosystems. All right, so let's look at our result of temperature. I'm going to show you a video. We're going to start at 29 minutes. We're going to hope it works. It's from a show called River Monsters that used to play on Animal Planet. And backstory, the host of the show is a fisherman, and he's looking for this fish, this particular really big fish in Russia. And he is with a team of scientists, and they come across a site that is very interesting. All right, here we go, season 4. We're going to start at 29 minutes. We're going to hope this works. I'm going to put the volume down for a second. You're going to listen for how did they know that the fish had died unnaturally. They're going to see a bunch of fish, and it's not wanting to work. And we'll start right about here.
This is actually quite spooky. It looks like a migration of fish. There's all these fins sticking out of the water, and what it is, it's salmon upside down, and their tail fins breaking the surface, and they're all sort of drifting down with the current, and they're all dead. Of course, it's normal for salmon to die after spawning. I wonder if that's what's happening here. And even more of what we're seeing too many of. Dead salmon, and a lot of them now in fairly advanced stages of decomposition, which sometimes makes them fall apart and nicely go through the net. Other times you just get endless smelly fragments just all over the place. Just seeing all these dead fish. I mean, it's unpleasant just from a visceral point of view, just the smell of death. This one is pretty horrible. That was a male fish. It looked like that fish hadn't spawned. And the more we set our nets, the more I get the feeling that something out of the ordinary is happening here. Some of the ones that have actually broken open because they're so decomposed, they've still got eggs in, they've still got lots of eggs in. So this isn't normal. Normally dead salmon have no eggs, they've sowed the seeds of the next generation, but this isn't a normal situation. There's something going on here. Back at the scientists' research vessel, taking a break from netting, I find some salmon still alive close to shore and decide to perform a test using a thermometer borrowed from the scientists. So there's a very dramatic difference in water temperature. I could feel it with my hands, but according to the thermometer in the stream, the water was 10 degrees Celsius, 49 degrees Fahrenheit. At the mouth of the stream where the salmon are milling around is 15, 58 degrees Fahrenheit. And then here at the side of the river where the dead salmon are is 25, 76 degrees. That's a massive overall difference of 27 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, that's just such a difference, and the difference it makes to the fish. Again, very graphic, the difference between being alive and being dead.
All right, so we're going to pause there. All right, so let's go back to the questions. Make sure we picked up what we were supposed to. So, the scientists knew that the fish had died unnaturally from the temperature change because the fish had not yet reproduced. The fish had not laid their eggs. Normally, like they were saying, when salmon have their babies, they only have babies once, and then they die. So it's not unnatural to see a whole bunch of dead salmon, but they hadn't had their babies yet. So why it's bad for the whole ecosystem? Remember what I was saying about the domino effect. If one fish species dies, it messes up the food chain. All right, those salmon were going to be food for another animal, and the salmon eggs were also going to be part of that ecosystem, part of that food chain. So anytime you have a mass die-off like that, that's not supposed to happen at that particular time, that's going to have repercussions on your entire ecosystem. Okay? So let's move on to our second to last one, nitrates. Nitrates. So nitrates are an ingredient in fertilizer that we use in agriculture. Maybe if you're getting ready to, plant grass seed for the fall or whatever, maybe you're using fertilizers. So algae is not technically a plant. It's this green stuff. It's a protist, but it kind of acts like a plant. It uses the nitrates as a food. So if you have algae in a pond and all of a sudden it has a whole bunch of fertilizer, it's going to grow a lot and it's going to grow out of control. And we call that an algae bloom. An algae bloom. And whenever we have this algae bloom, we had this phenomenon called eutrophication. Eutrophication. So eu means good, and troph means food. So good food, that doesn't sound like a bad thing, right? But it is. Let's look at why it's not a good thing. So if the algae bloom will reduce the dissolved oxygen. It will also increase the turbidity. So nitrates affect another water quality indicator. So what happens? So we have our nitrates in the fertilizer from this little tractor. Here's some precipitation. Runoff, there's that word from the water cycle. Runoff carries it to a stream. It increases the nitrates. So here's my happy normal stream. Here's all these nitrates. Now there's too much algae blocking the surface. When this algae dies, it's going to be decomposed, and there's going to be a bacteria that eats up all the oxygen. This algae also blocks the sunlight from reaching these plants down here at the bottom. This leads to what's called a dead zone. Anytime you have eutrophication, things below it, it might look like green, and green might look like a good sign, but underneath all that muck, there's not really anything alive. All right? So which river has excess nitrates? Obviously, it's going to be the one over here on the left, where you have these kids swimming. All right, you have all this stuff growing on the surface. All right, anything below is going to have a hard time surviving. And our last water quality indicator, bioindicators. So bio means live, just like biosphere. These are animals and plants that we're going to use to monitor the health of the environment or ecosystem. And we can either look at whole groups, or we can look at individuals and their health. All right, a really good example of a bioindicator are amphibians. All right, because if you think about it, amphibians are things like frogs and toads. Frogs spend part of their life in water and part of their life on land. All right, if I have a whole bunch of frogs and then I look and all of a sudden I'm missing a whole lot, so my population gets cut in half over 1 year, I know something changed in the environment. Something bad happened because all those froggies died or went away. I can also look at the individual health. So if I pick up this one frog, I can look at it and I can figure out how old it is, and I could measure it and weigh it and see, is it big enough? Is it tiny for its age? Is it maturing right? Is it healthy or is it sick? And that's going to give me an idea of what its environment is like. If you're in a bad environment, all right, if you're a froggy in an environment, and I guess it's true for everything, if you're not in a healthy environment, you can't be healthy. It's very hard to be. All right, so we want to find populations of thriving plants and animals, all right, populations that are being held steady, they're not changing drastically from year to year, and that are full of healthy individuals, all right? Looking at bioindicators also show me how food chains, they show me the strength of a food chain. Normally with food chains, you have a lot of organisms down here. These are producers. If you remember from astronomy, producers are the things that make their own food, like plants. And then primary consumers eat producers, and secondary consumers eat primary consumers, and tertiary eat secondary. All right, if one of these levels is affected, like let's say these things, whatever these things are, these primary consumers, they go away. These secondary consumers now have nothing to eat, and their population is going to suffer. And if their population goes away, the tertiary population is also going to be affected. They're also going to have a reduced food source. All right, so again, there's that magical domino effect. If one thing's affected negatively, everything's affected negatively. All right, so I do have a little review. We have a little review. Let's take a moment and guess what is going to happen. All right, a sewer pipe. So you're going to choose which indicator you think is going to change as a result. So first, a sewer pipe burst and raw sewage is leaking into the lake, which happens from time to time. Ew, super gross. All right, what indicator changes? All right, so things that might change. You might have said turbidity because you're adding stuff. You're adding stuff that's murking up the water, that's making it dirty looking. Dissolved oxygen can change because that sewage is going to decrease the dissolved oxygen. And yeah, those two. So if you said those two, good job. A neighborhood is being built along a creek. All the trees along the stream channel have been cut down. What indicators will most likely change? So for this one, because the trees are being cut down, the shade is gone, so it's going to warm up, so temperature changes. If temperature changes, remember temperature can also change dissolved oxygen. The hot water can make the dissolved oxygen go down. And also, building increases erosion. Erosion causes an increase in turbidity. So turbidity, temperature, and oxygen. And is this our last one? Yep, this is our last one. A farmer has had a hard time getting their crops to grow, so they add some fertilizer, which runs off to a nearby pond. All right, so fertilizer, anytime you see fertilizer, you should automatically think nitrates, and nitrates lead to eutrophication. So nitrates is one. Eutrophication is when the nitrates cause so much algae, and then when the algae dies, the bacteria take up the oxygen. So dissolved oxygen goes down, and if there's more algae in the pond, because they had the nitrates to grow, you're going to have higher turbidity.